Welcome to Tales from the Tarot podcast, where you can learn about the tarot not from a book, but from people's lives. I'm your host, Tara, and I invite you to join me and my guests as we break down the human experience through story, myth, and archetypes. Today's guest is Mary Blades. Mary is an oracle, tarot reader, astrologer living in South Carolina, and I found her to just be delightful. Before we get into it, I want to mention a couple things. First of all, check the links below because we talked about some beautiful things with the High Priestess, such as de-armoring the cervix, and I'm going to link to a beautiful shop where you can purchase a cervix wand, and we also mentioned some beautiful music that I'm going to link. The second thing is I'm creating this brand new experience of archetypal study that's really about embodiment. So it's really about embodying these archetypes in ourselves and finding that inner union, finding our inner feminine and masculine template within us, and finding our own art within that, finding our own muse. So this is just an amazing path, and I'm honestly just now starting to birth it. So I'm going to put a link below. It was on Patreon and I may decide to change that, but for wherever it is for now, I'll link it below, and definitely calling in creatives for this. So yes. Okay. Now to the episode. I was reading a tarot book the other day and it said, I love this. It was in the Thoth. It was a book about the Thoth deck, and the author was saying, like, we make this mistake of thinking when we pull cards, we need to immediately jump to the book and read the book, and the book is right. He was like, throw that motherfucker out. He was like, throw that out. Like, you should always, always, always go with your first impression inside of you. Like when you pull a card, and it doesn't have to even match the book, like whatever comes up for you with that image, that's important. Like that's coming from your own like divine inner knowing, definitely.
I'm so glad you brought up the Toth deck because that just reminded me kind of one of the quintessential pieces of our conversation today is how I got attracted to like the High Priestess, the Tarot, etc. And I was studying with Sage Popham. He's the evolutionary herbalism. That's his company basically. So I was studying with him and he was teaching astro herbalism, so how plants tie into astrology, and that's kind of where I was my jumping off point, I think. And he was like highly recommending that we start working with the Thoth tarot of all the things. Like that was his big one. He was like, just get it, just start looking at the symbolism and the images. And I just really struggled with that. I really struggled to connect with the imagery. And then I would look at the book and I'd be like, these are such conflicting concepts. I don't understand what the message is. Like I can't wrap my mind around it. Like I was being very like linear in the way I was trying to perceive it, right? Instead of being more open to the flow of whatever meaning it has for me is what's important. I wasn't quite in the deep trust of myself yet in that part of my journey. So I was like, I need to get a different deck in order to learn how to work with the tarot. And the deck that I was drawn to was the Light Seers Tarot by Chris Ann. And I think it was primarily because the image on the front of it was this picture of the High Priestess from her deck.
Beautiful.
That was on the outside of the box. And that imagery, I was just like, ooh, yeah, I like this one a lot. So that's really kind of what drew me in to the High Priestess, I think.
Love that. I love that. We should, yeah, I think that's so good to always follow like our heart, like that pull where we're like, oh, we like something in us is joy, like our joy lights up with it, like, ooh.
Absolutely, absolutely. Following what feels good is such a big key component of learning how to trust yourself, I think.
Mhm. And then, so that's what drew you to the high priestess. So what would you say is, let's talk about the high priestess in general, like as an archetype. Like what comes up for you around that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of obviously themes around like trusting your inner knowing and your own divine connection. That's something that's really big for me, and being this inherent bridge between realms, like as womb bearers especially, you're this bridge between spiritual and physical. Like you bring like the spirit of a person and you birth it into life through
Yeah,
your womb.
right.
It's like just this very big bridge energy to me. Like you're this channel, you're this bridge, you're this connecting force, and that just comes pretty inherently by design, in my opinion. But that was something that was particularly tricky for me because I was indoctrinated into like the very like patriarchal Christian religion as a child.
Mhm.
And so where I went to church, women were not an authority on any kind of
Mm,
divine connection. Women were subservient. Women were not seen as being able to speak to divine matters. And so that actually, because that being so deeply ingrained in how I was raised and the way I began to view myself as a person, I really didn't trust myself. I didn't have a lot of that. Like, I didn't have a lot of high self esteem. I didn't think I could trust myself. I looked a lot to external validation, a lot.
yes.
And so, yeah, were you raised in a similar capacity?
Not the church. I was not raised going to church or anything like that, but my mom was part of the Mormon church growing up. And so like we did kind of get raised by this just, bow to authority, follow authority, and just do what they tell you kind of mentality, like don't question anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously, those things are passed down ancestrally, and it takes some kind of rewiring and reworking to clear that.
Mhm.
And also, just as you were saying, bow to authority outside of you, like follow the structure that's been put into place by,
Mhm.
top down, etc.
Mhm.
And that's I think an overarching theme for the culture, at least here in America. It's like, we've got these school systems that teach us how to follow rules. They don't teach us how to be creative, independent thinkers or problem solvers. They say that those are the traits that are valued, but then they don't actually teach those skills.
Yeah, that's
So,
actually one of the high priestess's main themes, which I was really delighted to discover. One of her keywords is independence.
mm,
Actually, I wrote it down in, I forget which book I saw this in, but it said unrestricted independence.
and like sovereignty, I think, right? In a sense,
Yeah.
because you're not relying on authority outside of yourself. I mean, kind of. You kind of are. It's like you trust that you've got this divine inherent authority that's connected within you. That's kind of how I see it. Is like
I
you
think,
are not separate. You are a part of it. You're an extension of
right.
it.
And this is where it gets really interesting. I mean, there's a lot to unpack about the high priestess. There's so much to unpack. But like in the old Marseille decks, she's like a nun, or she's like called the popess. And so like she's
Mm-hmm.
a church woman. She's like a woman of the church. Like, and she is deeply dedicated to God. Like she's devoted to God. And
Mm-hmm.
so in a lot of ways, it's like this idea that yes, as women, we are absolutely empowered and we absolutely have our own say and our own independence, but we cannot do that alone. Like we also need 50% of the divine masculine provision as well. And like that's where like I think the shadow priestess is maybe like when we trying to be like, oh goddess, it's all the goddess, and like, the future is female, and it's like, wait, no. Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're spot on. The card that I actually pulled, I pulled a card for our call from the Isis Oracle, and it's literally called Awaken the Priestess Within. So,
oh,
but well, maybe not ironically, like obviously, I wound up pulling this card, which speaks to healing the divine masculine.
ooh,
And
yeah.
that's such an integral piece, as you just said, to really being able to, I think, really deepen in your devotion and have
Yeah.
the space that you need to fully embody that without letting the pendulum swing too far into the goddess only, feminine power only. Like it really is a balance thing, um, which is obviously why they show like the dark and the light and the pillars on the traditional card. It's all
Right.
about
That
both and like the moon archetype.
totally. It's like she holds that template of inner union, sacred inner union inside of her. And actually, you mentioned faith or trust. You said like opening to more trust. Another one of her big keywords is faith. Which I love.
Exactly.
Yeah, but oh, it's so interesting. Oh my God, I'm just gonna go and go on her today. It's like
Okay, go. You just
she's
go.
like okay. So she also is the guardian. She's like known as the great guardian, which means she can bar our way forward. And that's one that you'll read in books. It'll say like she bars your way forward. And I've sat with that and contemplated that a lot. And that comes up in so many areas of a woman's life. Like when you are navigating your own inner wilderness and like your own erotic self, like how to be in your power, like your own body wisdom, like your internal wisdom, which, in Tantra, it's called Vidya, which is sort of like this natural body encoded wisdom. Um, and it's so funny because like from a lot of my life, I thought that intuition was the word. And now I'm realizing it's not intuition, it's instincts, because instincts are in the body. But like we need this guardian element or piece of it, because if we don't have the guardian to like know when to stop ourselves, then like we overstep ourselves and we don't get the body wisdom, then our instincts are from fear. It's like a fine line between, is this fear or is this instinctual? Is this my empowered instinct, or am I overstepping myself and my nervous system is overwired, or like it's just kind of like a thrill, or you know what I mean? Like it's just I feel like that's the high priestess's territory.
Absolutely. As I was listening to you, the word that came up in my mind was discernment, and
Okay.
and having like that inner trust and being able to discern between and be that guardian for yourself and like your discernment in that matter. And
That's
being
so,
able,
yeah, discernment. Love
but
it.
I really like how you said that intuition and instincts are kind of synonymous. And I do still like the word intuition, but it is kind of one of those words that was very obscure to me for a long time. Like it was hard for me to wrap my brain around. I'm like, what is this mysterious intuition they keep talking about? Like self-trust, what is that?
Right, because like we're trying to get it from what, well, first up here at our head, and we're trying to get it from out there. When I think of intuition, it's like, yeah, I'm trying to get it from somewhere else. But when I think of instincts, it's like, oh, my body. Okay. Like I can get down with that. That's like my body knows, okay, it's easy. Do I feel contracted or constricted, or is there fear, or is there like a relaxed feeling, when I'm about to make a choice? Um, so yeah, that
I think there's a big piece of self-sacrifice, um, and like people pleasing and wanting to live up to other people's expectations that cause us to abandon ourselves and like our true nature. And you can actually feel that resistance in your body. Like on the inside, it doesn't match maybe what you're saying on the outside. And that's at least been my experience. It's like on the inside, like, maybe I didn't actually really want to do this thing, but I feel this like force of obligation to help someone in a certain way or be there for someone in a certain way that they've asked me to, and I felt like I couldn't say no. um, and just being able to tune into when that feeling comes up in my body and I feel that resistance. But also it's a little tricky because I think sometimes we feel resistance to things that are like that next big step for us that are just a little outside of the comfort zone. So
Right.
being able to
That's such a good point. Yes. And that's why I think like it does give us that discernment. Like you said, that knowing of the timing of like when it's right. Cause maybe we need to wait a little bit. Like, maybe we know it's right. We're still resisting it. Maybe you just wait another week or something and then we'll be ready. But like, I love that she is one of the few archetypes that is about waiting and not rushing. And like,
mm,
um, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
the part you were saying about like feeling guilty and like saying yes to people when you really feel a no. One of the things that came up for her when I was doing research was do not be superficial or concerned with brand or image with her, because she does not
mm,
like that kind of thing. She's more about like the real authenticity. So it's interesting because in this world you have to get so quiet to get in touch with that kind of truth in yourself. You'll just get bombarded with people's opinions everywhere and they're all different.
and peeling away those layers of identifiers that I think other people projected onto you, that's been such a huge piece of my own journey, especially with like empathic tendencies. You really kind of tended to like, if someone has a projection that they're placing onto you, if you're a child and you don't have that discernment, you just accept that as part of your identity.
Right.
You're like, oh, I guess this is who I am because this is who you're telling me I am. And
Yep.
so to me, that's been a huge piece of my personal journey with this kind of like full moon culmination energy in Libra. It's like really just healing that pain of the past and like that imbalance of identity that didn't actually belong to me, and becoming more clear on, well, who am I in my authentic expression,
Right.
who am I when I'm not trying to present this like brand or this image.
Right. Oh, that's big. That's such big work. Big work. And like what I've noticed in doing that kind of inner work is like you do shed these layers of yourself and people don't like it. Like people are like,
No.
that's not Tara. Like that's not that Tara I know. Like, or they'll like cancel you or just, unsubscribe from your stuff. And it's okay. I mean, of course, people are allowed to go where they feel drawn to, because we're changing beings and we're not always going to be drawn to the same thing our whole life. But it is interesting how people are like awkward, or the change just makes people feel cringe or awkward sometimes. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's cringe or what it really is, but
So I've actually experienced people closest to me, because I have been so growth focused and like personal development focused for the last handful of years. I've I've changed quite a bit in my values, my self-worth, like the things that I'm really seeking in the world. And people don't like that. You're met with resistance from other people because they want to keep you where you are. Because if you expand too much, you're going to outgrow them. And maybe those people aren't ready to grow with you. And so they want to maybe try and keep you small. And so they try to I mean, that's the only way I can really describe it is
oh,
like
you're absolutely right, because then you're like feeding into their whatever their like perception of reality is, and their identity basically. Like if
right, you're questioning their identity. And they're
yeah,
like, no, I'm not ready for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Tell us a story about your life that links to the high priestess. You kind of just did.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
any
It's been evolving in just, I think, greater layers of depth, and really finding deeper faith in the higher power, a deeper inner trust. And it's been through a series of wild events, of course. Like there's so many different stories I could tell you with a similar theme. And and being willing to go into this place of deeper surrender, um, and just trusting that even when my external circumstances, I can't physically see, and like I can't logic a way out of it. Like I am an overthinker for sure. And I try to figure out all possible outcomes. Always. That's how I've always tended to be. And so I try to foresee and imagine like all these different possibilities and how it could come together. But, as you know, with anyone who's coming into manifestation or conscious creation work, they say, you surrender the how. you, you just need to know your why and you surrender the how. But it's like, how do you actually do that?
Yeah, yeah.
When your mind's in overload and you're trying to imagine the outcomes of things, for me, it's just been numerous stories, different variations of just learning how to let go of how I expect it to look and hold my intention of what I want to experience, and just being willing to see beyond the physical reality of my experience, because it's really hard sometimes to see a way out. For instance, like most specifically in my story, I just recently sold my home, I ended my marriage. Like those were such big transitionary pieces.
Mm.
And it's really hard to imagine a life beyond the life you've known for the
Yeah.
last however many years, right? So it's really, really hard to see how you're going to overcome those steps, and where you're going to wind up and how you're going to be happy, and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was just really holding on to this just deep trust in the process, like deep trust that I will be led and guided to the place that I need to be. And
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. I love that you asked the question, how do we let go of the how?
I mean, sometimes it feels impossible, right? Like your brain's just like, let me figure it out. I got this under control.
And I literally just before this call, I was listening to this song. It was so beautiful. And the lyrics were, die such a death of surrender and love that you will never have to die again.
Mm, that is really beautiful. What a potent message.
Oh, God. Yeah, I was just like, wow, that's really it, isn't it?
You'll have to link that song in the
Yeah,
podcast.
I'll do that. So, next question. If the high priestess was a person, what advice do you think she would tell you?
Hmm. Probably to find some form of meditation practice that works for you. um, that's a very specific instruction of a to do kind of thing, but essentially it's just go within and just know that the answers that you seek are alive inside of you, and stop seeking the answers necessarily from a book or a greater authority or person. um, I mean, those things are great as well. I, of course, enjoy investing in all of those things, and greater knowledge through books and teachings and other mentors. Like, I think that's incredibly valuable. But at the end of the day, once you've gone out and sought all that information, I think it's helpful to find your own truth within you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you can take it all in, but ultimately it's like you're feeding it into your own template of inner wisdom and then like creating from that. You're not just regurgitating what you're hearing like a parrot.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned creating from that, because for me, it's such a big part of like the creative blueprint. It's like obviously you've got your divine masculine, divine feminine coming together, and then you create from those places. Or wounded, and you can sometimes create from those places too. Obviously, like the goal, in my opinion, is like trying to get to this place of more just wholeness,
Yeah.
um, and acceptance and integration of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a little bit of a tangent. Sorry.
I
I
like
mean,
it.
not sorry. I'm not apologizing for myself.
I think like she would tell me, get quiet. Yeah, like unplug. That's kind of like her thing. Unplug.
Hmm. Grounding, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Pray. Like she would tell me to have faith more and like go to my altar more. Like
Mm.
sit at the altar and actually like work on faith. I don't know if that makes sense, work on faith, but like devote more to uh higher power, God, devote to God, trust God more.
It feels so good when you do have or create the space to stay devoted in that practice. Um, I've been obviously transitioning a lot through different places and spaces, and just finally having a space of my own where I can have a really beautiful altar set up and go sit down intentionally and just say a little invocation, say a little prayer, set an intention for the day before I even get started. And it's so easy to get tangled up into distractions, like reaching for your phone first thing and then going down the rabbit hole there of whatever, or um, like really prioritizing taking that moment in the morning, or whenever your devotional practice feels most alive for you, to just ground into that faith in the higher power and the unknown. It just feels so much better when you start your day like that, or just have that energy present.
I totally agree. That's something I started doing just in the past month, actually, is lighting a candle every morning. And I have this little book called Jesus Calling, which is so funny because I'm not a church kid, or that's not really ever been my background, but it was a part of mysticism that I've never explored. And, that's just how we are as humans. As we get older, we want to explore more things that are like out of our range. And so I've never really looked into Christian mysticism and the Gnostics and all this kind of stuff. And I love that word gnosis. It's like this inner knowing. And so I've kind of opened myself more to that. And I just turned to a random page and it's just like an oracle. Like he tells you that he's there for you, basically. It's like, I'm here for you today. Like every page is just him saying, we've got this. Like, I'm here. I'm holding your hand through all of it. Like and it's like this beautiful new kind of like fatherly connection that I've, never really brought that into my I suppose I have in some ways through Indian gurus and things like that. And I do have one of their pictures on my altar. But was different, kind of opening to this different energy. Just maybe it's like the same energy, but it's just a deepening of it.
That's really beautiful. I resonate a lot with what you shared, especially with healing kind of like a bit of a father wound. And I've been thinking about those deep seated wounds of just, I think it's abandonment. Like, I think there's a big abandonment wound for masculine and feminine, like the god, goddess energy, just like feeling abandoned by it. Um,
A lot of us, oh my gosh, I was listening to a song yesterday and it was like a male singer. It was like a song from the 80s and he was so passionate and so emotional and it was a man, but I got like a feminine energy from him and I like had this download in my car like just from this pop song and I was like thinking like, "Oh my God, it's the fragmented feminine inside of the masculine wanting the masculine inside of it was like this whole thing where I was like, oh my gosh, it's just two parts of the whole craving each other through music."
hmm, that's really, really. how profound that came to you.
They're like driving home, looking at all the cars. They're like, "Oh my gosh, we're all just fragments of the whole, like missing each other."
We're longing for, yeah. Totally. Totally.
Another thing I was thinking about was like if the high priestess gave me advice would be privacy. Like imagine that, like privacy in the current world we live in.
Yeah, so I think that privacy, obviously very valuable. It's something that I personally really long for. I want the kind of privacy where I could go garden naked in my backyard and not have to worry about people
Oh,
like seeing me, you know?
I feel you. I want a yoni sunbathe in my yard.
Yes, yes. Honestly, I got to a place where I just like was doing that, even though I lived in Nashville and totally had neighbors. I was like, you know what, if they come this close to my property, like they're gonna see what they're gonna see.
But love
but
your courage.
but it took a while for me to get there. Initially I was like, oh, I could never. And then I was like, who cares?
Yeah.
um, but yeah, like I think especially with the imagery around the high priestess with this like veiled um
Mm.
the veil kind of presents so many different ways of looking at it. Obviously, you've got like unveiling and seeing like your true nature, but you could also have like this veil of privacy and
Yeah.
protection. And again, I think kind of just focusing on your own channel rather than allowing other channels to come in and influence
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
that that self trust and that discernment and that connection that you have.
I love that so much. Yeah.
This has been so juicy and fun. I've really been enjoying it. I was a little bit nervous, but I'm having such a good time.
Realizing that these podcast episodes are just like I'm treating them like we're sitting in a women's circle and we're just kind of taking turns like sharing what's lighting us up about this stuff, and yeah. But one of the other things that's coming to me is that I've found about the high priestess is that she is okay. This is the contradiction. I find these contradictions so interesting. Of course, she's got the duality and the two pillars. So she probably is like the archetype of contradiction. She is the one who is linked to water, the water element, and the water is the most penetrable. It allows itself to be penetrated the most deeply. It can absorb the most, it can receive the most. It is like the most comprehending, can be imprinted upon. So, that being said, the contradiction of that is that she also represents this guardianship, this blocking, impenetrable, like so impenetrability. So, it's like she is our teacher of how to walk between those two worlds and sort of like navigate those spaces and I guess, find the balance.
That's a really important piece that you've brought up with the connection to water, like the subconscious or unconscious realms, and then also integrating it into the consciousness. It's kind of how I look at water, and then also water as the archetype of allowing feelings to flow rather than letting them stagnate, and that like fresh energy that can flow through when you are in tune with your emotional intelligence. I think that that's a really key piece of the high priestess, so I'm really glad you brought that up because it would have slipped my mind.
Emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And really like integrating that with maybe more classic ways of looking at intellect, and more structured logical thinking,
Yeah.
and like bridging those realms again, and bringing it into this wholeness and this higher intelligence through the bridging of the two.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of like, I'm gonna go kind of more tantric here. They like
Of course.
me think of the body and like the cervix and how the cervix is like the that gateway, right? It's like the place where you can allow the entrance into the womb, basically like the most sacred place, and it's like the gateway to pleasure as well, like the most sacred pleasure, the kind that like gives us altered states. And you know, so in that sense, it's that's not an easy place for a lot of women, most women, that's a place that requires lots of de-armoring.
Mm.
And so I feel like very much the high priestess kind of, that's like her seat, perhaps in the body.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that, especially can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I had this weird ringing that started in my ear, so interesting. Not sure what that means, but um I actually started diving deeper into like the priestess path in general when I became more attuned to my body, my cycles, um, my fertility, all of these things, because I was looking into becoming a mother, and so I got very intimately in tune with my body in a way that I had never been before,
Right.
because we're really not taught. Like we're really not taught the extent of our power through the womb, especially. And so becoming aware of those creative cycles and the cervix, the way when you were talking about it, this is what came up, is just like learning when you actually can conceive. There's a limited window.
Mm.
You can't just conceive all the time. And in fact, like your cervical fluid forms this brick-like structure when you're not, like when it's not time for you to be ovulating and when
My
it's not
God.
time, like it forms this like block, your cervical fluid does. And
Wow.
when it is time, it actually creates these channels where like sperm and semen can like flow. It flows right up in there. Otherwise the structure looks like this under a microscope. It's like bricks.
Wow.
Nothing's getting through.
That's amazing.
Uh, so a little fertility lesson there. Get
Wow.
empowered, learn about your fertility if you don't already know. That's my public service announcement.
Yeah, I love, that's crazy. I love that. It's amazing what our body knows how to do.
Yeah, but de-armoring has been huge for me as well because there have been countless occasions where I did not honor myself and my needs. I honored or valued someone else's needs above my own.
Mhm.
And I didn't honor my inner no. You know, I was just like trying to say yes to other people so they would like me and like want me and about hopefully value me.
Right.
But that was something in my experience anyway that, and I think that that's very common for a lot of women.
Yep, I've definitely been there for sure. So actually, there's two more questions. So pop
Okay.
culture. So in pop culture and movies, yeah, what comes up around the High Priestess in pop culture movies or song?
Isla Schaefer, she's a great musician. Yema, also really great. Like those,
Yeah, I love the High Priestess song you shared from Yema. That was beautiful.
yeah. So all of their music, it really has helped me in elevating um, just to a different, because what you're feeding yourself on repeat. Like I used to listen to things like, really degrading rap music and things like that because it's what was popular when I was a kid, and it's what like the cool kids were doing. And so of course I wanted to fit in, and that's what I listened to. But as I look back, it's like the messages that we're receiving.
Mm.
It doesn't even. It's like not even subliminal. It's so overt. It's
Right.
just like
It's
so.
funny
It's just
that you bring that up because right now in my Patreon, one of the assignments is for people to turn on cringe or guilty pleasure music because we're doing the devil archetype, which is it is about that kind of crude energy. So it's like it's all about
Mm.
letting yourself like let that into your system, but then not like you don't have to stay in it, but like it's like about not judging. It's really mostly about like not judging yourself for the guilty pleasures and the things. But that's just funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking, oh yeah, the other night I was listening to gangster rap.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that that's the practice that you're facilitating right now because that's something that I revisited last year or two was just playing my old rap songs and like my playlist and really getting into it and just like really enjoying it.
Yeah,
And then also recognizing that it doesn't actually usually serve me to have that kind of thing on repeat.
I wholeheartedly agree. Like it's like it's weird. It's like I knew that I didn't need to go back to it anymore, but it was sort of like just a practice, some kind of like thing to kind of see how much I was going to judge myself when I played it. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I definitely had a very similar experience. So that's really cool that you brought that up. And then in terms of movies, I really, really, really love the movie Sucker Punch. I don't
okay.
know if you've ever seen it.
I've heard of
Um,
it, but I don't know that I've seen it.
it came out circa like 2011, I think.
Okay.
And I didn't actually see it when it came out. I saw it a handful of years ago. And actually, the first time I watched it, I was using some psychedelics, but that always helps with like being able to see some deeper messages, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, it was just this very deeply profound message. And I think it was marketed mostly to maybe maybe like gamers. It was kind of like this very like gamer oriented kind of appeal, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
It would probably be pretty big at like Dragon Con or something like that. But I think it really held some very deep messages of just saying how like you have everything you need within you, no matter what your external circumstances are.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a really strong focus in that movie, especially around women and being in this confinement, like literally being in the worst possible imprisonment and confinement that you can imagine. And something that many women have suffered from
Mm-hmm.
in not so long ago history. And it's just like this really beautiful story of how these women came together in camaraderie and were able to see beyond their circumstances and find what they needed within them to set themselves free
Mm-hmm.
from the experience. So highly recommend that one. It's one of my all-time favorites. And that one's what really came up for me in terms of the high priestess archetype. But
Cool.
I also really, really recommend the magicians as well in terms of just all the archetypes.
I
All of the archetypes there.
thank you for that. Yeah, I Googled that. It looks cool. I'll check it out. Um, for me, what came up was a song for the High Priestess. It's an old Fleetwood Mac song. It's
Ooh.
gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. And it's like one of the ones that it's not very popular, but it's called Crystal. And it actually did make it into a movie. They featured Stevie Nicks redid it later in life, and she like redid it with a different band, but they put it in a movie called Practical Magic. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Oh, I love practical magic.
That's
Also one of my
that's
favorites.
also like a very high priestessy movie too, because it's like about the witch, that witchy magic and women standing in their power.
Are
But
you more of a Nicole Kidman or a Sandra Bullock?
that's so hard. Like I like them both. I loved Sandra Bullock in that movie. I don't know, I like them both.
Yeah. It's totally possible to be both. Let's be real.
But yeah, that song is just like the first line is like, do you always trust your first initial feeling? I think it's like the first lyric. It's like the lyrics are beautiful. It's about I don't know, the whole thing just feels high priestessy to me. It's about like intuition and
Yeah, I hear that. I think Stevie Nicks like is the high priestess in some
yeah.
modern tarot deck, you know? Like someone's created that imagery.
Did you ever see American Horror Story, The
The
Coven?
coven, yeah.
They had her, yeah, she was guest starred on it. It was great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I watched that when I was visiting in New Orleans. And so it was really fun to just have that history from that lens and then actually get to go around and see um, more of like their spin on magic and that sort of thing. So
Gosh, that's incredible. You were like in their neighborhood.
yeah, Marie Laveau and all of that. I got to see the house and everything like that they featured it in. They actually filmed it there. So it was
That's
very fun.
amazing. Super cool. All right. So last question. What zodiac sign would you associate the high priestess with?
Ooh.
Or planet?
Or planet.
Mm. Well, I
That's
guess
a really
officially associated with the moon.
true. That is true. Hmm. I feel like there's so many that she could fit within, just depending on which lens you try to use, obviously. Like if you're looking at water as a lens, or if you're looking at the moon as a lens, it's like, well, okay. Or goddess energy as a lens, you're like, okay, maybe more like Taurus, um, but then I think that there's more of a balance and integration. That's a good question. I feel like I want to put more thought into it than than this really allots for.
Do it. Yeah, do it. Make an Instagram post about it.
Okay, I will.
That's your homework.
I will.
I think for me personally, she represents like all the water signs, like Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, because like, you know, they are like that receptive, penetrable. They have that penetrative. They're able to be penetrated, you know, the depth.
I really like that you brought up Scorpio.
Mm.
That feels pretty good to me because not only is there an intermingling between the scales now and Scorpio, because that constellation is inside where we traditionally know Scorpio is. Um,
Hmm.
and that brings like this merger of like air and water together, I think. And also like sexuality as being a major theme and like being a creative conduit. I think being in touch with your sexual energy is really big.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that's what I love about the high priestess is she mixes the sacred and the profane.
Beautiful. I love it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support and explore my work further, you can subscribe to patreon.com/readings and rituals.